And that being said, today is Tuesday, February 8th, and we're going to be talking about Chapter 2, Strategy and Sustainability. I did take a quick look at the homework. It looked to me like most of you made it through the Chapter 3 B and 3C homeworks in pretty good shape. For those of you that I would say scored below like a 25, you still have today to that, 10%. If you, I think on the one, it was a 32, so 10% would give you like a 29. So you could still go ahead and make any corrections today. So if you're struggling with that, again, you can look at that, the recordings on the 3.5 page in Canvas, or you can email me your spreadsheet and I'll be happy to take a look at your spreadsheet and try to give you some feedback. I'm going to go ahead and not have my video going, and we'll just kind of go off of the screen. If you have questions, I think our best approach is going to be for you to unmute and just ask your question during class. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and flip over to the PowerPoint. So Chapter 2 is about strategy and sustainability, and we kind of went a little bit out of order. We did Chapter 1 and then Chapter 3, and then moved back to Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is just a little bit less quantitative than Chapter 3, and I wanted to give us a little bit of a break between Chapter 3 and the exam. So what we're going to do is, again, we're going to cover Chapter 2 today, and then on Thursday, let's go ahead and meet in room 306, and we're going to review the case study, The Tao of Timbuktu, and we'll do the exam review in 306 on Thursday. Okay. So what we want to, our first learning objective for Chapter 2 is we want to understand the parameters of sustainable operations in a supply chain strategy. And I'm going to try to kind of keep bouncing back and make sure that I don't miss admitting anybody. So this is a slide that I think is a really good, gives a really good visual of this sustainability and the triple bottom line. So when we talk about the triple bottom line, we're interested in making sure that we have this crossover between social, environment, and economic factors, right? And so where those three intersect, that's where we talk about sustainable, because we're trying to make sure that we have to be economically viable or the company won't stay in business. Socially viable makes it so that, and we'll talk about social factors here in a little bit, but again, what's good for people and the environment, right? And we want to make sure that we're addressing all three of those. And an activity can only be sustained or done long-term if it is socially acceptable, environmentally friendly, and economically viable. So, and that's true regardless of what business you're operating. Okay. And then this is your textbook's visual on the triple bottom line, right? That we have to have environmental stewardship, economic prosperity, and social responsibility. So social responsibility pertains to those practices that are fair and beneficial towards labor, the community, the region that which the firm conducts its business, right? Economic is the firm is obligated to compensate shareholders who provide capital through stock, and environmental refers to the firm's impact on the environment. So I'm going to come back to the video part of it here. If you would go ahead and let's have a short discussion here. I'm not going to require you to turn your video on because I know some of you may not have prepped for the day just yet, and some of you are all ready to go. But what I want to talk about is, so let's think about a business from the standpoint of how they, who they impact, right? So Let's use Briggs and Stratton as the example. Okay, so Briggs and Stratton was a company that was here in Murray for a significant amount of time. Given that they were here in Murray for a significant amount of time, how did they, on these three factors, economic, environmental, and social responsibility, what would you say their impact was when they were, let's say when they were going well, when things were going well here in Murray? Give me examples of how they impacted economic factors, environmental factors, and social responsibility factors. Anybody have any thoughts or ideas on that? Let's start with economic. How did they impact the community of Murray through economic factors?
They provided jobs for a large portion of the community.
They did, right? Do you know how many people they employed kind of when they were in their heyday?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, so I think when I came to Murray, they were employing over 1,000 people at that time, right? So, economically, we can think about, it's not just those families, but how then that impacts other businesses here in this area, right? So grocery stores, right? If we have people that are employed, they buy furniture, they buy groceries, if they shop local, it does a lot for the local economic situation. What about environmental? What kinds of things would we think about for a manufacturing plant? What would we want to see from environmental factors? How would we want them to be environmentally responsible and socially responsible? What would you say we would want to see there? Zach, what do you think? I heard you for just a quick second and then you popped back out.
Okay, I got it work. I guess environmentally, I guess control waste and pollution as much as they can.
Right. That's kind of our go-to on the environment standpoint, right? One of the things that you see today is you see manufacturing plants talking about trying to go to zero waste. And from back in my day in the late 80s, early 90s, that was not a huge consideration. And so, and there's some good, I think there's a couple video links in terms of some companies that are trying to improve their sustainability and social practices. You can see those at the beginning on that intro page in Canvas. And then, so socially, again, that pertains to fair, beneficial business practices towards labor, the community, and the region. What would you think of in terms of labor? What would we be looking for in terms of social responsibility with labor? Elena, what do you think? What in terms of social responsibility towards labor, what would we want a manufacturing company to do?
Maybe like the workers being on time and being like responsible for the shift that they're supposed to be coming to.
Okay, so that would be from the labor perspective, that would be their responsibility as an employee. But what is the business's responsibility towards people that they employ? That's more when we talk about social responsibility. What's the business's responsibility towards people that they employ?
Probably like keeping them safe and providing them with like fair pay.
Exactly. Yeah, those are definitely some considerations there. And then what you'll see is, I think that's sort of the bare minimum that we expect people to participate in or include as an employer. And then you'll see, companies that go above and beyond. So Pella basically at every manufacturing site has a budget that they put forward that they want their manufacturing plants to reinvest in the community. So as an example, when I was in Story City, right, they redid one of the parks with a really nice park building with, indoor restrooms and like a meeting space. And now Pello didn't do 100% of it, but they contributed significantly so that that project could be funded. And so that's, again, kind of another benefit that organizations can bring. They don't always bring, but that they can bring to their communities. And that's part of that social responsibility. Okay. So when we talk about a sustainable strategy, we're talking about how we're going to create and sustain value for shareholders, right? Shareholders are those individuals or companies that legally own one or more shares of stock in the company. And stakeholders are individuals or organizations who are directly or indirectly influenced by the actions of the firm. So let's go back to Briggs & Stratton. So shareholders in Briggs & Stratton are those that have stock in the company, right? Stakeholders are those individuals or organizations who are influenced by the actions of the firm. So stakeholders would have been employees, right? They were definitely directly impacted. Their families were directly impacted by the actions of the firm. The suppliers that supplied the manufacturing plant were definitely impacted, right? The region, and again, if we think about a manufacturing plant that's operating now, if they're not handling their waste in an appropriate manner, that can have an influence on community, right? And so again, I don't have the exact statistic, but there's a value that you can place on for when you employ someone, what value that adds to the community as a whole. And so that's going to be where those stakeholder influences come into play. And so the key here is to remember the difference between shareholders are those that have that financial ownership of the firm, and stakeholders are the ones that are influenced by it, but don't necessarily own stock in that firm. Okay. So when we add a sustainability requirement to strategy, that means that we're saying that we're going to accomplish our goals without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so that's where we talk about the triple bottom line in terms of social, economic, and environmental criteria. Okay. So this next phase, we're going to talk about the competitive dimensions of operations and supply chain strategy. When we formulate a strategy, right, we develop it and refine that strategy basically annually. We review the vision, the mission, and the objectives, right? We do a strategic analysis and we define strategic initiatives. I don't necessarily find that all companies refine the vision and the mission, right? Usually objectives are refined year over year, definitely. Sometimes vision and mission we don't do every year. But then we conduct strategic analysis based on what our objectives were last year and where we're headed for this year, right? And then we define what are our strategic initiatives moving forward. Then we translate that strategy quarterly, right? And then as time progresses and we implement some of those strategies, we define and revise those initiatives, budgets, measures, and targets. Okay. This is where I think the meat of this discussion comes into play. All right. There's a lot that you can tell about an organization if you understand what they're competing on. And in fact, there are whole textbooks devoted to strategy, identifying competitive dimensions and understanding how organizations should focus and should, if they're a manufacturing organization, how they should create their layout based on what they're competing on. Okay. So if you look, the orange are the competitive dimensions: price, quality, speed, reliability, coping with changes in demand or changes in volume, and then flexibility. Can we change the new product? And it's easier for me to go, here's how I've kind of learned them: cost, quality, delivery, and flexibility. But delivery and flexibility have two components. Delivery has the component of how fast do I get it there? And then how reliable am I? Do I get it there when I say I'm going to get it there? So that's the two components of delivery. And then flexibility has am I flexible in my manufacturing environment where I can create more volume or reduce volume with that flexibility in my manufacturing process? Or Do I have flexibility? Can I offer a variety of products and new products at a high speed? So again, cost, quality, delivery, flexibility, right? And then delivery and flexibility have a couple of components. And you could also say the new product introduction, would be innovation as well. So cost, quality, delivery, flexibility, and innovation are kind of the competitive dimensions that we work with today. So cost or price, right? That means that we are focused on providing the lowest cost alternative in the marketplace. Okay. Quality says I'm going to make a great product or deliver a great service. Delivery speed says I can get it to my customer quickly. Delivery reliability, I'm going to deliver it when I promise to, right? And coping with changes in demand. If I have upswings in volume or downswings in volume, I can adjust my production cycle easily, right? And flexibility and new product introduction speed means that I better have a good research and development team if I'm going to be, again, this is kind of that first to market kind of approach. And there's been a lot of conversation on whether these competitive dimensions are trade-offs or whether they're what we would call cumulative capabilities. So trade-offs would say, like, for example, delivery speed and price, to me, we can pretty well confirm those are trade-offs, right? If I'm going to try to get it fastest to the market, and that means that maybe I have to use air, right? That means that my price is probably not going to be low, okay? On the other hand, quality seems to be what we would call a cumulative capability. Whenever I improve quality, I actually have benefit to price because I have less waste. I have benefit to delivery reliability and delivery speed because I don't have these makeovers that take time in the production process. So quality seems to be what we would call a cumulative capability, right? But what we have to determine is that we can't do organizations that are going to be competitive they typically, I should say, are not competitive on all of these dimensions. So strategy is making that selection. What of these competitive dimensions are we going to focus on? Okay. And so management has to decide which parameters are critical and concentrate their resources on those characteristics. So for example, a firm that's focused on low cost may not be capable of quickly introducing new products. And we called that term, when they try to do too much, straddling, where they try to match a successful competitor by adding features or services, and then pretty soon they're trying to do everything and they're really not focused on their strategic market. Okay. So we use these order winners and order qualifiers to identify where we're going to be, what our competitive dimensions are. And here's how, let's just talk about what order winners and order qualifiers are, and then we'll talk about how they're used in the marketplace. Okay, so order winners and order qualifiers are, if you take the market, let's just talk about cell phones as an example. So if I use cell phones as an example, I can probably at least get, I'm sure there's way more than this, but let's just do two, right? We can get the college student and we can get the typical senior citizen, right? And they're going to desire different things from their cell phone. So that's kind of two markets. And in those two markets, we might try to determine, okay, for a senior citizen like my parents, right? What are the things that a phone has to have before they'll even consider buying it, right? That's the order qualifiers. So for my parents, that's going to be a screen that's large enough that they can read and a keyboard that's large enough that it's easy for them to manipulate. For a college student, those order qualifiers, what the phone has to have, are probably slightly different. And actually there's subcategories for this market category as well. But you all have things, it has to have a camera, it has to have, whatever features that you say my phone has to have before I'm even going to consider buying it. Okay. Well, those are your order qualifiers. So from a manufacturing standpoint, what we have to do is we have to meet what every other manufacturer is doing in order to be able to be at least in consideration for our customers buying those products in those particular markets. Now, order winners are the criteria that our customers use that say, once I've narrowed down my pool by using my order qualifiers, there's particular features that I'm going to go, that's it. That's what I love about this product. So I'm going to buy it because it has this particular feature. So an easy way for me to talk about that, back when I was working on my PhD, I needed to buy a new laptop, and I type by touch. And so one of my order qualifiers was that the keyboard had to have, at that time they had some flat keyboards that didn't have any distinction between the keys, and I need to be able to feel the difference between the keys, and I wanted it to be relatively light and a relatively good processing speed, right? And so by the time I got my my order qualifiers were actually the weight and the speed of the computer, because I was going to be doing some what am I trying to say? Statistical software that I needed to have a pretty good speed on my computer for. So those are my kind of order qualifying. And as I set the 3 that fit that criteria, I'm in Best Buy and I'm looking at those 3, my order winner is the one that has that touch keyboard that I can feel, right? That's the feature that I went, oh, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I want, right? So that's what I have to, that's the feature that I use to determine which one I'm going to ultimately purchase, okay? And so it's that the order qualifiers are what bring those products into consideration. And then the order winner are those criteria that you say, now that I have these maybe 3 products that I've narrowed my field down to, I'm buying this one because it has this particular feature. Okay, so that's when we talk about order winners and order qualifiers. And again, there's whole courses taught on how to identify the marketplace and the order winners and order qualifiers and how to link that to manufacturing strategy. Okay, so in this class, we're just going to take a quick snapshot to look at how strategies implemented through operations and supply chain. Okay, so what has to happen, I'm just going to go back to this slide because we don't have any other slides on it, is that for order qualifiers, your manufacturing site has to meet the minimum criteria to be in consideration. So my computer had to be a particular weight. Well, when in manufacturing, we have to understand from the marketing standpoint, what are those weights that get us into consideration? And we have to make sure that we meet that minimum criteria, okay? And then for order winner criteria, we have to beat the competition on those, right? So that's how we translate our order winners and order qualifiers into what is it that we need to do in manufacturing, because that's what's going to win us the order. To get into the game, we have to meet the minimum criteria of the qualifiers. To win the customer, we have to be better than our competition on those order winners, okay? And then we want to talk about the concept of risk assessment and mitigation. And so our textbook, one of the things in this class that I hope that you take away are some frameworks that you can use to think about problem situations. And so there's just kind of this, this risk assessment framework where we identify the risk, and then we, on the right side of the equation, we put together, okay, well, what would be our mitigation strategy with that? So what are the sources of potential disruptions? What's the potential impact of the risk, and how are we going to mitigate that risk? And don't you know, these have changed a lot from 4 years ago, because none of us would have probably thought something like COVID-19 would have had the impact that it does, right? And so having these plans in place to recover is a significant indicator of whether a firm is going to survive one of these natural disasters that we have, right? And so again, that's these contingency planning. You'll find some insurance companies that actually, that's a component of what they do, is they work with their companies to develop these contingency plans, okay? So the thing to recognize is that all strategies have a risk level, right? And so uncertainty in the environment causes supply chain planners to evaluate the relative riskiness of their strategies. I think one of the things that we're going to see out of COVID-19 is we're going to see people thinking about near sourcing more than what they did before COVID-19. We're going to see companies saying, okay, well, I want to be, and probably more multiple sourcing from different regions of the world, right? So that they have this this ability to draw from different suppliers, even if one region of the world is shut down because of again, COVID-19 or some type of natural disaster. So the supply chain risk is that likelihood of a disruption that's going to impact the ability of a company to continuously supply products or services. So, you know, we're coming up on Valentine's Day, right? I'm sure some of you have probably heard there's going to be chocolate candy shortage again, that we're not going to be able, and this is the second year in a row for that. So again, that's a supply chain risk. They're not able to get the ingredients to make chocolate to supply the demand at this time of the year. So supply chain coordination risks are associated with the day-to-day management of the supply chain. Disruption risks are caused by natural or man-made disasters. It's kind of interesting. Are we, you know, some of us would say we've transitioned, COVID has transitioned into a day-to-day management. However, initially it was certainly disruption. And so, you know, over time, if we continue to have that disruption, it becomes part of our day-to-day management. So the quantitative part of this chapter is just about productivity and how we measure productivity, okay? And so productivity is O over I. And so outputs over inputs are what we use when we measure productivity. Okay. Productivity it's a relative measure. It has, if I told you that the productivity on a production line yesterday was 3.25, that doesn't have any meaning unless you know that the average for the month was 3.21. So they're 3.25. So they've improved over the average for the month. Right? So we have to compare it to something else. Or I can compare it to if I have plants that are set up identically, right? I can compare one plant to another. Or on a broader scale, when we talk about some dollars, let's say sales per employee, right? We can compare firm over firm or income per employee, okay? So again, productivity is outputs over inputs, and we have 3 different types of productivity measures, okay? We have partial productivity measures, which is a single input. We have multi-factor productivity measures where we compare an output to a group of inputs. And we have total productivity measures where we compare output to all inputs, all right? So that's what it is conceptually. I'm going to go ahead and come into Canvas here. And let's go ahead and go. Take a quick look at your homework here. Okay, so we have chapter 2 under apply what you learned. Right, we have the 2A practice homework, and here's the actual recording of how to do that. Let's just take a quick look at that recording so I can, or at this homework, practice homework, so I can talk to you about partial productivity, multi-factor productivity, and total productivity. Okay, so we're going to be talking about productivity here in terms of output over input. Okay, and so our output is the number of units produced and our input is the total machine hours. Okay, this would be what we would call partial productivity because we're only looking at one input, which is the number of machine hours. Okay, and then let's take a look at the next. Oh, and I show you this in the recording, but the key on this one is that you have to get productivity by month and then average those 4 productivities. If you try to add up all of the units and all of the hours and then calculate it, you lose some of the variability that comes into play there. Okay, and so then in the second problem, we're going to have output in terms of cars sold, units sold, right, and dollars per car. But again, we're still looking at partial productivity because we're only calculating one input. We're only talking about labor. Okay, and in the third one, right, we have sales, labor, raw material, and capital. So this is the one where we're going to get into some partial productivity and some multi-factor productivity, right? So partial productivity, when it says calculate partial productivity for labor, I'm only using output of units and the labor hours. And partial productivity for capital productivity is the units by the equipment hours, okay? Multi-factor productivity says I'm going to use both the labor and capital figures together. So that's when I get multi-factor productivity, okay? And then this one is just about a percentage change in terms of productivity. So it's saying calculate the productivity for April and then calculate it for May. And then to get the difference, the percentage change, you take the most recent, so May being the most recent, minus the oldest, which is April, and then divide it by the oldest to get that percentage change. So that's really what you're going to be doing in terms of the homework for that section. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Just as a reminder, we're going to meet in 306 on Thursday. We're going to do and that's a in-class points for being there to review the case study, which most of you will want to be there anyway, because we'll do the exam review after we talk through that case study. And I think that should be help bring home some of the concepts about competitive capabilities and how that ties into manufacturing. All right, any questions? All right, that's what I have for you today. So I will see you on Thursday, okay?